Today she's talking about a quite different exhibition. It's Terry Evans' Stories of the American Prairies. And this is currently on display in the photography gallery, and it will be on display until July. You know that Dr. McCuster has been the curator of photography for the past, I think it's 8 years. And she's exhibited more than 50, she's organized more than 50 exhibitions, either at the Horn or the Museum of Photographic Arts in San Diego, where she was the photographic editor, curator previously. I'll just note that when my husband and I did visit the show, and we went there recently, we found it especially fascinating in this exhibit that was the contrasting perspectives between close-up and panoramic, and between the natural and the human world. Also, as I have appreciated from other shows that Dr. McCuster curated, she has a special knack of placing certain photographs next to others in a way that allows one photograph to comment on the other. I think that's very distinctive. And with the vaccine now, most of us have gotten at least the first shot. I hope that many of you will be ready to visit the Harn exhibition in person. So now, Carol, it's all up to you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me back. It's a pleasure to be here. I hope all of you are well, or as well as can be. I think for me, that changes from day to day, and we just have to make the best of it. So what gets me through is looking at photographs, and I hope this lecture here that we can take our time, you know, to really look closely at the images. I'll tell you a lot of my process. I'll tell you a little bit about Terry Evans. But what I really want and hope is that in the months to come that you actually can go into the hall, the Rubin Gallery at the Harn, and experience these in person. I know, you know, that's a lot to ask, but the Harn is a very safe place to be in. It's huge, the ceilings are high, and the audiences are very small, and we make sure everyone's masked up. The spaces are so large and there are so few people coming that worrying about proximity, it just depends. Each individual can make up their mind, but it's a beautiful exhibition to be in the presence of because of her artistry. And so what we're talking about are the photographs of Terry Evans. And this is a woman, the show actually will be up until the 4th of July, so we have plenty of time. I just wanted you to know that. This is a woman whose career I have watched for about 15, even 20 years. Among curators and photography historians, people know her very well and really prize the commitment and dedication of her long career. She's 74 years old, has lived in the Midwest all of her life. And I have a special predilection for women landscape photographers who use big cameras or a variety of cameras and take them out into the field and really create a poetic vision of their own through the camera of what the landscape feels like and looks like in different kinds of weather, all kinds of transformations. And Terry Evans in particular, because of her long career and the way that she keeps pushing the envelope and changing her vision, is a love letter. That's what I call it in the exhibition. This is her love letter to America's heartland, because she's documenting the lives and the environmental transformations of the Midwest. And she goes all the way from down to Texas, all the way up to the Canada border. So I don't know if we're not yet on the images, right? Can we have like an introductory slide?
Yes, I was just waiting for your cue.
Yeah, that's okay.
All right.
I'm going to whet your appetite a little bit by the initial slide. There you can see the dates that it's till July 4th that the exhibition will be up.
Okay, do you see the presenter view or the full screen view?
I see the presenter view, so we could get rid of the
Okay.
right-hand side.
Mhm.
So while that's going on, you know, what I want to suggest to you is the depth and commitment of her work. As I said, she goes from Texas to Canada, photographing the Midwest. Wallace Stegner, a writer that I really like, who is a historian and author of novels and histories, he once said that a place doesn't become a place until it acquires a poet who describes it. And for me, Terry Evans is a visual poet. Her descriptions of the land are so graceful, and they include a deep understanding about what's going on in the landscape and how it's changing. And it is both hopeful, and then there's also a sense of grief in some of her images too, about how she's seen things rapidly change in her long career. What you see here is the opening photograph that we have on the title wall. And you can see it's a collage. These are multiple images taken from a local prairie that she goes to often. That's her husband, you can see in the middle far right-hand side square, him walking away into the prairie. These are her latest, and we're going to talk about them a little later on, a series that she calls Ancient Prairies. And she's continuing to make these kinds of collages of up close, where you can see right into the specifics of different kinds of flower and fauna and leaf formations, as well as the distant view. And this is what makes her so interesting. She goes from the micro to the macro in her perspectives, in examining the land and the ground. And then she goes up into the air. She has been a flyer, where she does hot air balloons, or she has pilots take her where she can do a kind of flyover, although she does not consider her flyovers as we would, you know, going from one coast to the other, or even from Texas to Chicago. Hers are very slow and specific. And she ardently wants to correct any blind spots we may have about our information about the Midwest and prairies. The other thing is that we live in a prairie land. So I find that really fascinating and equally relevant to us, is that we have a beautiful prairie surrounding us that's also being impacted by rapid development. So I feel that her photographs sort of speak to our collective here and our need for the health of our environment and well-being. That's very fitting to our time. Can we have the next slide? So when I was talking to Terry about her
Sorry
work,
about the technical difficulties.
that's okay, I'll continue talking. As I said, I'm drawn to women landscape photographers who use tripods and different kinds of cameras, some of them large, her level of commitment to her vision for over 40 years. And through all of this, I really want to encourage you to visit her website, because it's really quite stunning. She has done over 20 series in her long career, and each series is on her website. Now, within that series are at least tens, if not hundreds, of photographs, and we're only seeing those ones that she decides to put up on the website. And these are years in the making. And the series envelop a lot of different ways of her experimenting and looking at the land, the transformations of the land. And what I did is I chose just 33 out of these hundreds of photographs, because I wanted to tell a story about the way it felt to experience her photographs. For instance, look at this one here on the screen. You can see it's wintertime. She's in the prairie. There's a distant view. The trees are stark against the sky, and that long, weedy foreground. And then you see her dog, Zephyr, who kind of blends beautifully into that mound of prairie grass. These are the kinds of things that are both unique and lovely about her work. So she said to me that the 33 images that I chose, that she said most curators curate her work, either following one series after another series, or they do a chronological survey of her work. And that she said to me that I've chosen what it feels like to be working with her images, that I created a feeling about her entire life's work that matches her own. And I can't tell you how satisfying that was to have an artist say that, because we were then both on the same wavelength. And it was much more about her telling a story about the magisterial gaze, which is a 19th century term for 19th century painting, actually, that implies the creator or the doctrine of manifest destiny, and that her aerial photographs claim through the eye this beautiful, far-reaching landscape. But at the same time, there is this close proximity to the land and the people. We'll see that she's also photographed people that are part of her vision and her message, that I feel is part fable and history and autobiography altogether. So you can see I have 6 categories. So this is very well organized when you get into the space itself, and we're even going to see some exhibition gallery photographs so that you can get a sense of it. That I've broken it up to, the beginning is called Our Place, of which you see Zephyr, the dog here, and the farmland that she grew up on. Then into the prairie, then into the steel and petcoke development around the Chicago area. Then there's a story of portraits of people engaged in the land as workers or as activists. And then the industrial complexity of Chicago itself. Chicago was built on a prairie. And then lastly, all of the above in concert with or straining against the land beneath. And what Terry does is she's consciously engaging us in the wonder and the well-being of this land and what the future holds for it. So could we have the next? That E. Cummings quote is one of my favorite too. So here you see 2 portraits of Terry with a couple of decades in between. You can see her getting ready to board a plane with the pilot there behind her and all her gear. She is a master of her craft, of her cameras, of knowing when to go up and photograph, to study the light and the way the light hits the landscape. There's a lot of diversity and understanding of what will register in her camera. And then you see her, this was taken just probably a year or so ago, of her with her camera and tripod, working with her Ancient Prairies series. Can we have the next? So here we have another one of those collaged pieces on the left, and then a close-up of a specimens book from the 19th century. I have included Terry's own words from her website and these little text panels that you will see in the show that I think reveal her commitment to not only being a fabulous photographer, but she also is interested in the biology and botany, the way that Native Americans have understood and related to the land. Persian miniatures inform her work. She started out as a painter, so you can see that painterliness in her work. She's also very involved in spiritual pursuits, whether it's Buddhism or her own Christianity. And that, you know, this kind of beauty that she's in search of and an understanding of the prairie comes from a deep study of the industrial development of it, its diversification, and not least that these wonderful specimens that you see here, we have another one in the show as well, are from Chicago's notable Field Museum, which has a lot of 19th century specimens that she went in there to photograph. I'm going to read you just a little bit of one of her texts, because I want you to get a sense of her herself. She says here that the prairie is a polyculture of perennial plants that expresses a spiral growth system based on diversity and self-renewal. Its roots can extend 25 feet into the earth, holding the soil firm. Only 15% is visible. It is hard to discern any visual organization, but I would eventually see it and come to understand the prairie. Whenever I am there, I experience a kind of presence not felt anywhere else, and it mystifies me. Is the prairie holy? The Greek and Hebrew word for wind is the same as spirit and breath. William Irwin Thompson wrote that the ego is a line and the soul is a circle. Quote, but the archetypal image of the resolution of the line and the circle is the spiral, for the spiral is the basic image of dynamic growth. The spiral expresses movement that includes as it unfolds. So I just love that image of her trying to understand the complexities of what's going on under the earth, and how this manifestation of all this growth, which she studies and loves and wants us to look and experience, goes from the 19th century to her present practice. Could we have the next one? So here we start too at her farm, which was absolutely essential to her growing up. The sunrise out in the field that you see there on the left, and then this is her ancestral home that she inherited and still occupies sometimes. She goes out there, especially during the pandemic, she has been going out to the farm, but she also with her husband lives in Chicago as well. So you can see that light is so beautifully captured. I would just love you to see these images. They're large, they're beautiful. The detail in those windows in the house are almost like miniature paintings. And without a doubt, she was aware of everything that was reflective in them. So she says, my exploration of this beautiful prairie sent me reading about biology, Plains Indians, Persian miniature paintings, Eastern spiritualism, and Christianity. I questioned broadly and the prairie led me. In 2019, I returned to the land in a series titled Ancient Prairies. This helped me to remember the wisdom and beauty of intact prairies that cannot exist without acknowledging the kinship between humans and nature. Can we have the next? This is one of the women that she knows out there in the prairie. Her name is Toots. And it's just such a great profile, the way it's framed by the window of the cab of the truck, and the kind of sturdiness of this woman. And then the line directly behind her of that flat Kansas prairie. It's just a beautiful, beautifully lit image. And speaks to, you know, the kind of people that she knows and is drawn to, that make up the web and weft of, you know, what it's like to live out there. Could I have the next, please? And as Laura said, I do like to create parallels between images. So these two are hung close to one another. And I think you can see what I'm trying to capture here is, you know, this understanding that, you know, patterns in nature repeat themselves or have an ability to mimic one another, even though it's unintentional. But here is one of her aerial views flying over the Kansas prairie. And you can see the furrows that have been plowed. And then also this beautiful up close image of a horse and his ribs. Could we have the next? And we gradually start to leave the natural landscape as we see it, or, you know, there is clearly man-made marks within the landscape here, but those are hay bales at sunset. So you can see their long shadows creating a kind of abstraction in this beautiful, beautiful rendering. And the image on the right is what is clearly an encroachment and an absolute claim to the land that the left-hand image is trying to preserve for certain reasons, and then for other needs, which he talks about, our addiction to oil and the need for energy resources is actually changing, of course, the texture and the climate of the natural world. Could we have the next? And then we get closer to the Chicago area of the enormous amounts of industry that is claiming this vast area. It was really quite a bit of an education for me to see the network of railroads that come and go daily through Chicago, carrying all kinds of materials. So Evans began photographing the steel mills, and here you see some of the raw material being delivered or taken away. And she's connecting the steel's essential substance to the prairie land that's actually surrounding it. And, you know, we see the belching of buildings, we see the air that gets consumed and expelled. And she wanted to see what these structures contained inside. This is a beautiful aerial photograph. It almost looks like a black and white photograph, doesn't it? But it's actually color. You can see a little bit of the cars have red on them. But looking at this, seeing the external vastness of them, and that actual prairie once existed underneath these has always been a measure of fascination with her. Could we have the next one? So she said that, you know, looking at these from the air also made her want to see what these structures contained inside. And so for over 2.5 to 3 years, she started making appointments to walk into these vast structures and to photograph the making of steel. And she said these pictures raise questions about the destruction of land necessary to produce steel, which feeds many of our desires. Steel mills, North Dakota fracking, and petcoke pollution in Southeast Chicago show human disregard for land and its people. I'm deeply disturbed by our seeming inability to confront the current and impending disasters of our intensive fossil fuel overuse and the climate change our lives are provoking. But at the same time, this is a very large photograph, I have to tell you. She is drawn to the inside of these working mills, and she said that she experienced this mystery of transformation, that to see fire turn raw materials into steel. And she said it was like a process that was dangerous, terrifying, and utterly beautiful. It is a creative act. And she respected the stakes for the steel workers who were involved in this process. And she said, my obsession with the workings of steel mills was a journey into an underworld of darkness and fire. And I felt that I was close to an ancient process that was thrilling as well as threatening. And I think, you know, any of you who know Louise Nevelson, the great sculptor from the mid-20th century, her way of attaching boxes and circles and shapes together to create these walls of structural texture, that there's something mimicking this kind of massive steel production, and the light and the air that you can feel around it, the heat. Terry actually had to wear protective gear from her toes to the top of her head. She had an escort every time that she went in. He was part of the environmental protection agency part of these steel mills, to just make sure that she was safe in her process. But yeah, this has both something that feels threatening, but also incredibly beautiful. Could we have the next? Again, this kind of amazing. This feels like something primordial, like part of some religious ceremony from an ancient culture, maybe from another planet. But it is us making our raw materials for what we need. And it's not to say that we have to stop doing this. How do we back ourselves out of this? That's her question. She's part of all of us. She's not making any accusations against anybody else that she's not leveling to herself. But again, these kinds of monumental structures that are awesome to look at and to wonder about, and to also know their impact on our lives. Could I have the next one? This is the one that her whole address of the pet coke piles that were being stored in the southeast side of Chicago got her to be an outright activist and to join a group of residents who were being deeply impacted by these pet coke piles. So pet coke is produced from crude oil refinement, and it would be shipped to Chicago from the Alberta, Canada tar sands. And once it got to Chicago, this crude oil would be transformed to produce steel and aluminum and fuel. And it is primarily carbon with some heavy metals in it, and it resembles coal dust. This is what you're seeing here, are piles of coal dust. Those are trucks that you can see in there. And what you see are those white vertical poles are sprinkling water. And when the wind blows in Chicago, and we know Chicago is the windy city, the residents that are just abutting these pet coke piles report that dust was settling in their homes, their lungs, their eyes, their throats, over all the waterways, the aquatic life, the baseball field right next door to it. And here you see dust suppression sprinkler systems that are trying to tamp down the dust to prevent it from becoming airborne. She has other photographs. One of them I include a smaller one that just shows how massive trains are transporting this on a daily basis into Chicago, although it has stopped. I will give you a note of hope that has ceased. Could we have the next one? Because what Terry then came to understand through the Pet Coke project and the series that she did on that was the relationship between people and their local land. And these photographs are of workers and activists. And you see here on the left, Martin Morales and Cliff Joseph, who I'll tell you about in a moment, and then one of the oil riggers here on the right. So these photographs, the stories change. The stories are of resistance. They're of corporate control. They're about the landscape changing. She even went up to North Dakota with the PBS journalist Elizabeth Farnsworth, and they did a project together about fracking. All of this was part of her education of what was happening and what activists were actually doing to regulate specifically to the pet coke storage and the dust monitoring of the particulate matter that was falling all over the neighborhoods. Their own political involvement, especially with Martin Morales and Cliff Joseph, and that they actually had a transformative influence on what was happening. So now, after getting BP to quit shipping pet coke, they are beginning to envision a green industrial corridor in their landscape. And Chicago does have beautiful parks. I don't know how many of you have been there, or maybe you even lived there for a while, but the industrial corridor, the green corridors that they have, are really beautiful and give respite, you know, to some of these crowded neighborhoods. So she said that I joined their group and marched in protest, and I learned firsthand that climate change is caused by capitalism, which creates environmental and social injustice. And I do not live in this community, but I am a member. We are all members in community together. So she became a kind of woke activist and befriended a lot of people and resisted the Koch brothers, actually, and BP dumping of a lot of toxic waste too, which we know largely creates environmental issues for the poorer neighborhoods in major cities. I want to tell you a little bit about the two people on the left. Sadly, the man you see here, Martin Morales, with his 4-year-old daughter, Scarlett, he was an active member of the Southeast Side Coalition to ban pet coke, and you see him here with Scarlett. And in May last year, he died of COVID-19. So here we have, you know, this image was taken in 2015, but we have our pandemic right here in the gallery. And I hope that you'll let me read an excerpt of his obituary, because it's really quite beautiful. And it's always about remembering people for what their life was about, their activism and their commitment. So I'm just going to read a couple of sentences about Martin Morales. He was a man of principles and morality. Morales held a consciousness about the importance of standing up in his community to fight for the benefit of all, while he also had obligations at home and to his family. Each death from COVID-19 makes it abundantly clear that decades of failed policies are killing poor Black and Latinos at far greater rates. Morales, a healthy 58-year-old, should never have succumbed to this virus. However, more than a decade of living on the Southeast Side, exposed to lethal pollutants, made him more susceptible. His clarity and commitment to our fight to rid our community of pet coke was inspiring. He was fighting for the future health and well-being of his young daughter, his son, and his entire community. We invite all of those who seek a healthy and safe community to remember Martin Morales. So I just wanted to read that because what a man, and how sad. And Cliff Joseph, who you see in the middle, was an artist and activist, and he died this past November at the age of 99, just of natural causes, but not from COVID, but what a beautiful life. And there was a great New York Times obituary of him when he passed away in November, and they used this portrait as the lead for the obituary. You can look that up in the New York Times. I've also written for the Harns Coffee with the Curator blog. I wrote about Cliff Joseph because not only do we have him present in this exhibition, and what a life of strong art making. He was also an art therapist working in prisons and mental health institutions. He also created a body of work in the 60s and 70s that was quite profound, and you can see that online too. And through my connection to him, through Terry, I contacted him and purchased one of his artworks for an exhibition that we're doing next year called Text and Image. So I called him to actually tell him, and I got to speak to him last April. And he said to give all of the people in Florida his love. So I just want to convey that to you, and what a lovely man he was to speak to. And you'll see his work. It's a lithograph that we purchased next year in one of the shows. So could we have the next one? So here, Terry enters into Chicago itself, sometimes flying in a hot air balloon, as I said, and sometimes in a small plane. And she was commissioned to make aerial photographs of Chicago for the 2005 opening of Millennium Park. That's that wonderful park right downtown that includes, you know, an outdoor concert area, the Bean, which is a beautiful sculpture. You perhaps are familiar with that. So she did a beautiful commission where a book was produced from it as well, and her photographs were large and mounted on aluminum and mounted throughout the Millennium Park so that they were outdoor photographs, impervious to the weather, and really made quite an impression. So she says about this project that these photographs are neither a critique of land use nor a statement about the irony of its beauty. The photographs are not about abstract visual design. They are about specific places that I've come to know and love and care about. I highlighted issues that concern everyone in Chicago, but that's not all. I wanted to share the beauty of this gorgeous, complicated city. More than anything, I wanted to show the diversity and complexity of Chicago. So it's a wonderful thing to be able to see. These also are quite large. And the image on the right is actually a city prison. And you can see that there are men on the rooftop playing basketball in orange suits. It's just a startling image full of information, and the same with the one on the right, left, which is an apartment complex that has since been shut down and majorly renovated and reopened for low income housing. And can we have the next? So this concludes the exhibition, these two images. These are right in the heart of Chicago. The one on the right is of the lakes, Lake Michigan, and this jutting out, this kind of thumb of land that is captured here with the ice forming around the edges of it in the dead of winter. That brick building in the center was built in the 19th century and is used today for meetings and conventions and weddings and things like that. But I love the abstraction of both of them. These are both in the heart of Chicago. The one on the left is of Humboldt Park, and that area where you can see the rowboat is flooded regularly with city water so that people can swim and boat. Over that berm that you see on the left-hand side, there's another part of the lake. And they drain the one that we're looking at now in wintertime. They just drain it to get the water out. But the one on the left, I'm told, is kept with water and freezes over so that people can ice skate. You know, this is a kind of land use and care of a lot of the parks within Chicago that make it user-friendly. But speaking of Terry as a painter, I think you can see her love of line and gesture. It's almost as if, you know, she's done this with her hand, but it's her eye capturing and framing specific land masses and the way the light is playing on them. From this series, which I call The Land Beneath, she's trying to keep at the foreground that we may have this general view of Chicago, but she wants us to have a closer and very particular look of a place. And sometimes she says Chicago from above reminds me of looking at virgin prairie found from waist level. When I photograph the rich interweaving intricacy of the grasses of the prairie. So she's kind of weaving these bodies of water and the trees and the line of the bricks and the stone and the pathways. The prairie contains in her breast many stories of use and misuse, care and neglect. I now recognize them from the air and explore them further on the ground. Layers of use, loss, recovery, and loss again. As a spiral system, the prairie is a metaphor for human community, about living with diversity and deep roots and a sense of place. Sometimes I seem to be coming full circle, but the circle becomes a spiral as I continue working to render images of the patterns of the prairie. There are several quotes that I've used and put on the wall for people to just read, you know, and think about. And one of the ones that I love now, and I'm actually reading a book by Willa Cather. And the quote is, "The land belongs to the future." It's just a very simple quote, something, of course, we know, but what are we doing to the land now if it's going to continue and belong to the future? What's the future going to inherit? Could we have the next one? So this is a series that, or a combination that I put together. They're from 3 different series. You can see the one on the right is part of her Ancient Prairies collage work. That's a favorite tree of hers, an oak burr that she keeps going to in all kinds of seasons and photographing it. But the palette of these 3 together, I hung them on the wall because they kind of spoke to what she was talking about, is that there's a season of loss. So these have a very wintry feel, of course, and also the swan that is part of the Field Museum's 19th century archive. This is from the 19th century, where botanists and biologists were studying everything about the prairie, the flora and fauna, as well as the wildlife, the birds, the insects. And she very tenderly was allowed to take this out of its housing at the Field Museum and place it so that she could photograph it. It's just a remarkable image, and part and parcel, I think, of the feeling of these 3 photographs together. The one down at the bottom is out in Kansas, and you can see the broad fields, and it's an isolated church, probably built at early part of the 20th century, and it's a graveyard that you can see there with the long shadows that she's fond of when she's photographing from the air, usually at sunrise or sunset. Could we have the next? So here's some installation shots, just some quick ways of you to see the scale of these photographs and how they're hung together. Starting from the left, you can see that that's a series of the photographs of the steel and petcoke section, then moving into revealing Chicago and the various images of the steel works, the railroads. Can we have the next? I chose this very soft sage green to suggest, this sense of nature. And this is a view where all of the images together on those walls are of the natural world. Could we have the next one? And then you turn, oops, sorry, I thought there was another image, but when you turn away from this view, then you see all the industrial photographs. So it makes a nice contrast to kind of drive home her level of interest and how the transformation of the landscape has taken place in her area. Could we have the next? So this is a continuation of her Ancient Prairie series. This is one of her latest that she sent me. Those are actual photographs. These are not just color squares put together. At first, I wanted to read them to see the actual photographedness of each of those squares. And they are from her farm in Kansas, where she was spending a lot of time all last year. You can see her shadow over on the lower left, and the road leading away, the sunset on the right. Beautiful image. And I think that might be concluding it. Could we have one more? There she is now. She's still working. And I find such inspiration from that 40 years and still going strong and still seeing things in very particular ways. She's a curator's dream. She's accessible, she's warm, she's smart, and her work is inspiring. I want to tell you that she's going to be giving a lecture that you can join this coming Sunday. The Harn is having a public lecture with her, and she will be speaking for an hour about her work. So I hope you can partake. So I'm opening up some of your questions. Richard, did you want to say something? Is Richard?
Richard Petway, if you're speaking, you want to unmute?
I have two feelings that I wanted to express because I am a Texan, so Prairie is part, but I'm from Austin, which is hilly. But the point I'm raising is when I think of Prairie, I think of horsebacks and riding across this vast sea of grass. Also, when you brought up Joseph's picture, Chief Joseph was instrumental in the Western Plains Indian tribes. And Joseph, the last name, is kind of unique. And so I got the juxtaposed feeling about related to his last name being an instigator of change. One final comment about the second slide that you showed was a collage of the prairies, and I noticed in the upper left there was a railroad crossing sign.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously this engendered the whole spider web of trains going across this vast sea of grass on their way, taking products from one coast to the other, as well as I lived at one time around I-70. Which goes right through the heart of Kansas City and westward to Denver, right through Kansas. And so I think of transportation across this wilderness. And I even thought of, there was once some, the use of the word prairie schooner. Prairie schooners were to somewhat the migration image across this great sea of grass, and even some had sails on them to get the schooner kind of choice. So it's many images that it conjures up that she enlists with just the word prairie. And you think back to the American Gothic, with the guy, with the family, the husband, wife, and the pitchfork image of, I was also expecting that you would add some photographs of a weather-beaten face of a Kansas farmer that his face tells all of the story about his life and hardness, living in perhaps beginning in a sod house and trying to gain a living from the earth. But a very powerful set of images that kept flowing over me with each picture that you showed. I was very impressed, and it just is image full because of our history and the importance of this sea of grass in our historical manifest destiny phase, as well as in our current industrial phase, and even culminating with the recent enactment of a stoppage of a pipeline by executive order. So it's that goes through this area and threatens it in a way that it was finally unacceptable. Thank you very much for allowing me to see all the images and go back into the feelings that it engendered. I'm sure others have other feelings, but I wanted to share mine.
Richard, thank you so much for that, because you are absolutely right, everything that you were saying. And, you know, I didn't show you all the photographs in the show, and there is one of a train, aerial view of a train snaking through the prairie, just as you described it. And I really want you specifically to go on her website, because I think you'll see many, many more that will bring up your same associations. And I only chose 33 out of thousands of photographs that she has. And speaking of faces, yes, I mean, there are other people, you know, that she's photographed that have that weathered face. I thought Toots, you know, that one image of the woman in the car, by the car, kind of spoke a little bit to that. But you're absolutely right. You know, their faces are almost like the land itself. You know, it's furrowed. It shows the weather's effects.
Carol, I do have a question in chat.
Yeah.
Do you know where she had her camera on the steel furnace?
Well, it was on a tripod. Yeah, she had it on a tripod at a safe distance. I asked her what, I mean, she was using digital, so she didn't have to worry about her film melting. But, you know, the heat that she must have endured. And she said, yeah, it was hot in there. She didn't stay in there a long time, but yeah, her cameras were on tripods at a safe distance.
Carol, it looks like I have been in many steel mills because I'm from Pittsburgh.
Oh, yeah?
And my job took me there. But I was interested that one where all the sparks are flying, it looks like she's inside the furnace. And I wonder how she captured that. And
Yeah.
because it's not only hot, but it's also noisy. And when you have
Dangerous.
equipment, it's usually made for a man. I had an awful time keeping myself together because the equipment I had to wear when I went in there was made for a man. In those days, there were no women steel workers. So
Were you a steel worker?
Yeah, there weren't in the 70s.
Wow, that's great.
Thank you very much. It's a nice presentation. I've seen it in person.
Oh,
and
good.
it is very safe. I wanted to assure everybody. In fact, because your owls in the horn are so very wide, it's easy to avoid anybody and to stay within the 6 feet. But also, since your museum, the Horn has been closed different times, would you give the hours for everybody that it's open now?
Well, we're open Thursday through Sunday.
Okay.
And I believe, Laura, you can maybe confirm this. The Thursday and Friday hours, I think, are 11 to 5. I don't think we open at 10. I think it's 11 to 5.
Yes.
And 10 to 5 on Saturday, I believe. And then Sunday's a little more truncated. I think Sunday's only 1 to 5. That's always been. But check with the website.
Thank you very much.
All right, we do have a few more questions, hands up, so I'm just going to take them in order. Jan Lowenthal, go ahead and unmute.
An absolutely wonderful program. I wasn't even aware of her. I'm going to tell my son, who still lives in Chicago with his family. I just want to say Chicago has wonderful parks. It has lovely, lovely wildflower gardens. But if you take a train, if you ever have a chance to take a train out of Chicago, you soon will be into the prairies. And but my question is, does she actually live in the city?
She does.
Do you know what neighborhood?
She recently moved into a condo, so I think her and her husband were downsizing, and the condo is on the southern part of Chicago, overlooking the lake.
Huh. Maybe near Hyde Park, near University of Chicago.
Probably because, you know, she taught there for a while. I don't think she's teaching anymore.
Yeah, lovely, lovely neighborhood.
Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation.
Oh, thank you.
Got to get to the Harns.
Yeah.
All right, Kathleen Heyman, go ahead, unmute.
Well, I just wanted to say, and I don't know how to change the screen. I tried to say in chat, wonderful representation of our Midwest childhoods. We both grew up in rural environments and we both spent our adulthoods in Chicago.
Wow.
So we love her work. And it's a wonderful presentation, Carol. I did just check on the website and I was thrilled to see that they'd start opening on Tuesdays. So
Good. You know, I knew that was in the making. Great.
yeah, so it just happened. So I wanted to be sure and share that with everyone. But thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Susan Wilshire, go ahead, unmute.
All right, unmuted. I wonder if she has ever explored the relationship of her prairie to the prairies all over the world. There's a band of them that come around the world. We've been fortunate enough, I've been across Texas the long way and across Kansas all the way and in Kazakhstan and in the Anatolia prairie that goes across Turkey. And the Canadian, some of the part of the Canadian prairies. Do you know if there's any relationship that she's had or to examine that commonality?
Well, knowing her, you know, investigation of all manner of things, I would think that she's aware of them, but whether she's gotten into the specifics, and she hasn't traveled there to photograph them. But I'm going to ask her that on Sunday. I'm going to ask her about any kind of investigation with all the connections of prairie and how, you know, under the earth, you know, they're probably all connected and talking to one another.
Probably so. The one across Turkey, the Anatolian, is influenced by volcanic action. So it's got old fields of the results of volcanoes. And that would be quite different, but the others are very much like, particularly Kazakhstan. I was struck by how much that related in the same way to the infinite spaces, but a different way of people living on them. And I think that's in her retirement, she can have that as a nice project. I'd love to see it.
Now, does your profession at all create this interest of yours, or is it just your own personal interest?
It's my own personal interest, although my father was an ecologist and got me interested in whole systems as something to notice when I was traveling.
Great.
Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to seeing the exhibit.
Great. You know, I want to tell you, which a lot of you probably already heard about, the gift of the Vickers collection to the Harn, and that right now there's an exhibition that's being put up in our exhibition hall of these gifts. Quite a few of them are going to go up on the wall. And the Vickers are collectors in the Jacksonville area who donated 1,200 paintings, prints to the Harn that we just received. And it's all Florida landscapes from the 19th century to the mid 20th century. It's spectacular. So we're mounting that. They came to us framed, ready to hang. And I think that's why we also expanded our visiting hours too, is to allow some of that, you know, once the show opens, for it to be appreciated and seen. I don't want that to scare you, you know, to think, oh my God, there's going to be hordes of people. Maybe you want to wait to see what the pacing is like for people coming in to see it. I still feel that there's so many people that are super cautious and don't want to be in public spaces, and I understand that. So we'll keep you informed, and maybe Laura, you can also keep folks informed.
I don't see any other questions, but Carol, I'd be happy to share that link with all of our participants here that you sent us for that webinar or the Zoom call.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was sort of, if someone wanted to go to that, could they go to it through the going on the Harn website? Does that access that as well? Is there a way to get into the talk on Sunday? through the website?
Yeah, I sent it, I think, to you and to Julie, that's the direct link. This is all virtual. There's no, on-site lecture. And so, yeah, it's a virtual lecture with her. She's in Chicago and she's going to be talking to us from there.
I have
So
a question.
3:00. Okay, yep.
Are the weekend tours still being run by the docents?
No,
2 o'clock?
no,
Okay, no tours.
no tours.
Thank you. That's too bad.
That's due to COVID. We don't want too many people clustered together.
Right.
Okay, I would just make a suggestion that
Mhm.
if you could go to see the Terry Evans show, maybe right now is the perfect time, because do it before the 26th, which is when the major exhibition opens up for the, of the,
Yeah.
if you can before then, you're not going to encounter crowds. So it's a good moment.
Mhm.
And especially after the second shot that most of the inmates at Okemah will receive
Right.
shortly next week.
Great.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much.